Well, hello there. It's Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, 7M3, 8M1, More Trouble. Music by John Williams, orchestrated by Herb Spencer. And it's a particularly long queue, this one, because, of course, it's sort of two or even three, actually, kind of conjoined together. You'll see that there's quite an extensive amount of work I've done on this. As you'll see, 11 pages of it. And as with this, I've kind of half reduced it in the sense that I've kind of brought it back to what it might be sketched as, really, in some ways, which is kind of what I tend to sort of try and do. It just makes it easier for orchestrators to kind of see exactly what's going on, and to also see that sometimes, you know, the notes really do differ. So, for example, here piano is not quite the same as what's happening in the horns at that point as well, especially the low F, which isn't replicated anywhere else, actually, incidentally. So that's kind of why I do it. And just for those of you who are sort of unfamiliar, generally speaking, the higher the stave, that's kind of woodwind, then you get all the brass stuff, then strings on this sort of piano thing, and then sort of percussion, etc. Occasionally I do sort of little timp moments like that as well. In fact, I should even label it, which would be nice. So we could do that. Without further ado, let's delve into it, because there's all sorts of things going on. So this is the section of the film where Leia thinks she's heard something and is then arrested by one of the scout troopers, who sort of then talks to his friend to, you know, take her back to base, that sort of thing. And it's a good example, really, of underscore, where the interjections of the officers sort of come, or the interjections of the woodwinds sort of come after when the officers sort of speak. So it's quite nicely done. And of course, you know, we got very high strings at this point as well. They're all an octave higher. Generally speaking, sort of violin 1, violin 2s are divisi. That's quite a sort of common thing with violin 1s not divisi, but violin 2s, especially if you've got sort of three notes. I think it just kind of prefers to have, the orchestrator always prefers to have more people on the top note. So that's kind of how it starts, and we start off with a particularly sort of normal John Williams type chord here. Yes, I think I've mislabeled that, actually. Just as we begin here, because that's a C. So in fact, it's not really that. It's F minor major chord. So I think I can do that at that point, which is pitch class set 417. I just happen to know. So let's get rid of that, because that's not correct. But actually the point is still made that it's a type of alpha chord which is formed of two, let's just home in a little bit here, two diminished sevenths, a major seventh apart. And what you do is you pick elements from either the top diminished seventh and elements from the bottom diminished seventh, and it gives you... there we go. It gives you those notes. So that's what it is. Obviously, it's in inversion at this point. So that starts with an A in the bass. But we've also got an F sharp, which is also part of the octatonic collection. And we've also got little things here as well, where we've also got a 3-3 pitch class set. So again, I don't really label this in terms of a chord, because it's quite difficult to. I call it a major minor dyad, in the sense that you can have a major third and a minor third. So major third, minor third. It might be helpful if I just where are we? Window, nope, panels, keyboard. So that's the major and the minor. I wish they'd colour them green or red or something like that. It's so hard to see. It's like almost pointless having it there, really. Anyway, but I'll kind of get rid of it and bring it back when we need to. So anyway, the point is that we've got bits of octatonicism and sort of tonal ambiguity here as well. And interestingly enough, you know, a 3/3 is part of an octatonic set as well. Like that. It's just that it's a different octatonic set from the one that we've already got. But that's nothing wrong with that, and that's not unusual. The trouble is that none of these notes comply with that at all. So they could all be considered chord tones in the sense that they exist at least somewhere in this collection, or from the previous. So that D sharp and B exist from there. The C is kind of from this bit, and the G sharp is not. In fact, it is. It's there. So that you could kind of consider those chord tones. So just with a lot of Williams, you know, this sort of modularity in terms of when there's underscore, he tends to sort of, you know, really follow the action. So you'll have 4 bars of sort of octatonicism type stuff, and then you'll have a few more bars of something else. In this case, we've got an interesting one here where we got an octatonic harmonized melody here. I'm playing this an octave lower, like that. Which I'm sure he would have played on the piano, and it's all derived. They're all notes derived from that octatonic scale starting on C sharp. And I think that's what it is. There's might be a B there. There we go. But we've also got, you know, what he does a lot, which is a very jazz thing. Sort of have that second inversion there, and then another second inversion, in this case E flat minor. Just imagine that F sharp is a G flat, and then all will be well. And then we've also got sort of more octatonic subsets here as well. So yeah, on the piano it sounds really very bizarre indeed. Quite kind of cool though. And then we've got horns coming in at this point, and it's kind of atonal by that point as well. He does tend to sort of pair, you know, that sort of perfect fourth type sort of thing. Often, you know, a diminished fifth or an augmented fourth apart, like that. You know, you could keep going. So that happens. Not much going on because there's action on screen about to happen, which is where this happens and Wicket kind of basically fight back. Leia and Wicket fight back. So this is this whole section here. Let's just try and get most of that on the page at that point. And during this bit, we've got little bits of Leia's theme, but it's not harmonized in the same way because it's just sort of there to say that, hello, I'm here. It's mostly B flat minor, but it's kind of B flat minor major, which is why you get that sort of type of sound. I think that should be a quaver at that point. Yeah, typical sort of, you know, B flat minor major. We've got B flat minor with a sharp 4, like that, and often in a sort of an inversion, which is sort of nice in terms of hand shape, and that's about it really. It kind of shifts from B flat into E at that point, and then we have this sort of very sighing, you know, sort of wind down where the speed is shot down, which is quite cool. Here we got an F minor chord here. Notice again it's in second inversion. It happens so frequently. So there we go. You now all know how to voice all of these sort of chord complexes. Just make sure they're in second inversion. And we got some really nice chord complexes there as well. So sort of dyads kind of over the top of these things. But actually, I suppose you could also think of it in terms of F minor with an add 9 and sharp 11. That sort of thing as well. Sometimes it's not quite the same, but it's mostly the same. This sort of add 9, sometimes it's sort of diminished as well, but quite cool. And then we end up into a more relaxed territory as it shifts, where we have a B flat minor add 9 sharp 11. So the same chord complex as here. Without pitch set theory, it's kind of very hard sometimes to try and work out that that is actually the same chord as that. And so I tend to use pitch class set theory just to sort of see what similarities there are, really, rather than to use it as a sort of compositional tool. It's really not, really. And of course, you know, a lot of this is sort of jazz based, so you know we're not going to be using pitch class sets with jazz at all. But it just helps me to kind of identify what's going on. So if you're not that familiar with it, don't worry too much. It's more of a tool for me than it is for you, just to sort of identify all of this stuff. Just because I've seen other examples on the internet where they don't identify it at all, and then that's really unhelpful because you're not really then learning the language of John Williams's harmony at all, because you can't replicate it because you don't know what it is. Anyway, so then we go from E to B flat minor, and then it shifts into D flat, a sort of tertial shift, and then a specific chord. In this case, it's an F sharp minor chord, but with a major 7th and a flat 5. So it's a really weird chord. Like that. It's also voiced in an interesting way. So that if you have a look at the harp here, we've actually got sort of F sharp minor, it's just written differently, and F major, like that. You could also argue that there's a sort of, you know, it's almost, because of the way it's written, that sort of augmented flavour to it. But again, it's a sort of bitonal chord, and that's a typical sort of jazz chord, really. So, albeit a quite advanced one. And then we're shifting into D, but with an emphasis on the flat 6, sort of that B flat pedal. Like that. Which he does quite frequently, basically because it's sort of part of his sort of flat 6 type thing that he's got going in Star Wars anyway. And then we've got this sort of you know, that sort of horn call, Ewoks, little bits of Leia as well, as they sort of trundle off to back to Wicket's village. And then as we've got the sort of a hint of the Ewoks village here as well. Bum, ba-da, bum. I don't know why I didn't colour that yellow, so I will. Let's put a little review at that point. So we then move, and it segues into an edit at this point, where we're suddenly basically in the Death Star 2 and the throne room with the Emperor Palpatine, and Vader sort of comes up in the lift, and we see him sort of enter the room with his Imperial March. We've then got basically a sort of D pedal, but with atonal chords, which is we've seen in Empire as well, kind of when he's meditating, and he talks to Emperor Palpatine at that point. That's where we first see him, I think. And it then basically quickly goes from that sort of atonal moment, which I've just simply put there. I mean, we could do a pitch set for it, but really it's not massively helpful. I think one interesting feature is that the harmonic pitches spell a diminished 7th, like that, but they don't seem to be related to anything else. Because if it was an alpha chord, it could, well, actually, yeah. So, you know what? It's interesting. I've just changed my mind. This seems to be, let's imagine that that is an F sharp dim chord. If I then put a G dim, is the B flat in that lower one? And yes, it is over there. So that's interesting. But then we've also got an A to really complicate matters. So that's a sort of, you know, a nice minor 9th over there. And the A, I suppose, is related to this upper extension. So it's kind of an alpha sort of thing. Let's put a little query. Alpha chord, question mark. And we know that the alpha chord is derived from the octatonic scale as well. If you follow Mark Richards' course, he will indicate that for you. So then a sort of slightly weird sort of vibe Glock type sort of sound, especially after that finger symbol. Bum, ba bum. Almost like a sort of, is that hint of Ewok in there? It kind of is, but it doesn't seem very relevant at that point. Anyway, the main thing, the main thrust of this particular bit of the cue is the voices as we hear the Emperor's theme at that point. And I've done loads of ones of these, especially in Phantom. It's all sort of, you know, all of that. You know, all of that sort of going on. So I'm just going to skirt over it because we're so familiar with this by this stage, I think. He will come to me. Yes, and you will bring him before me as you wish. You know, all of this sort of stuff. It's great. I love it. I love Palpatine's voice. It's the best. And when he first comes in, there's a sort of hint that he can't quite pronounce his R's. I thought I told you to remain on the command ship. You know, all of that sort of stuff. I love it. Absolutely hilarious. Wonderful character. So then we're into the next cue, basically, which is the sort of more trouble bit, which is kind of what this sort of is regarded as. So we've got sort of more stuff of kind of Ewok-related things. Luke discovers Leia's helmet, and they're not sure what's happened to her. But we know, it's just they don't know, which is why it's not terribly sad. It's sort of wistful rather than sad. It's like, I wonder what's happened to her. I hope she's all right. You know, Han's sort of worried. And that's where here, you know, when C-3PO says, R2 can't find any trace of Leia. Yeah, thanks. Again, really helpful. He has been known to be wrong from time to time. You know, so we've got all of that going on. And really, really beautiful melody. I mean, I think it's one of his best. Yeah, it's interesting. Notice how that really does shift into that voicing. It's not that, because we're expecting that G. But there we've got here, which is interesting, that sort of sharp 4. No G in that bit, apart from it's kind of there, but it's nowhere else. Until the very latest bit of that bar, by which time the harmony's gone. Then we got E flat above D, and then E flat 7. Yeah, very jazz, basically. Then we've got sort of modulatory jolt, which goes... which is quite hard to hear on the actual film, actually, but this is the bit where sort of Chewie starts smelling food. And then we've got this sort of quirky little thing, which I don't think ever appears ever again. Except with all minor chords, I played that one incorrectly. That should be an A-flat minor chord, not major chord. And then we're into sort of cluster territory, where he says, oh no, you know, and they get sort of snapped, basically, up as he touches the food. This one's an interesting one. So, yeah, I mean, look at all of this craziness. So this is all wind with everything, all playing different lines. I wonder whether originally it was just supposed to be sort of octatonic bass and each one had their own little octatonic scale, because the top note does, which will be flute or piccolo. You know, albeit slightly different ones, but they basically follow that 0, 1, 3, 4. You know, that sort of thing. It's just sort of conjoined differently, and it's exactly the same with the lower part. But all the upper parts, all the middle parts, don't seem to quite follow it. So I don't know whether that's just a miscopying from the sketch, or whether like it's just very hard to read everybody's writing, because it is. Herb's writing is particularly difficult. His flats look almost identical to naturals. and it's very, very difficult to kind of discern them sometimes. And of course, mistakes crept in, as we've seen before. Anyway, but the interesting thing is it follows broadly an octatonic scale, which I think is particularly interesting, and that it spans a minor ninth like that, which is quite fun. So, it all sort of adds to this sort of huge sort of frenzy, basically. We've then got a sort of little bit of a scale, sort of a sequence. That sort of idea, which follows some of the octatonicisms that we've had, but not quite. But it does tend to follow augmented fifth and then minor second. Like that. Then it does change a little bit. Basically, it just goes from low to high. And that's it. We end up on a sort of D sharp E flat area with piccolo sort of highest note possible. And then we're into an A flat major pedal, but mostly with sort of C major 7 type stuff at the top. As well, so A flat pedal there. Then we've got at this point, as they're sort of trying to kind of get out, find my lightsaber, Han, can you reach it? All of that sort of stuff. We've got octatonic subsets here, like that. I'm sure that should be a D. Otherwise, it would be a pedal gliss. So I think that's misdone. So I'm going to change it. It's very, very difficult to know what the actual notes are when you listen to it. So I'm going to correct it from what it from what it should be, or to what it should be rather. Then we're in C major 7 type territory. That sort of idea. And really then we have a sort of post-tonal chord complex. So here we've got a really nice A minor chord, but then that sort of C sharp 5 inverted, and then it does even chromatically shifts down. That sort of G sharp becomes a G as well, so really very gnarly indeed. And then at the top we've got a very typical atonal voicing. It's set 3/5. If we think about the actual note, so let's do a relative set class. So imagine that is now 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 0, 5, 11. So we can put that in. 0, 5, and then E for 11, so you don't get confused with ones. Otherwise, I've called it sort of E flat sus sharp 4, that sort of thing is another way of looking at it. But again, it's a typical sort of jazz voicing, so but often used in atonal contexts by Williams. And then we've got a really nice little fun A Locrian scale. So in other words, the key of B flat major, but it's kind of basically centered around A. Like that. So I've called it A Locrian scale, but to be honest, it could also just be B flat major and just using any of the notes, and we don't know really what mode it is because it starts on different one, on that one, the Dorian mode, but it doesn't sound like a Dorian mode to me. Anyway, and then it ends on a D with a B flat, like that, which is quite strange. So yeah, that's kind of the bit, and a lovely little bit of Mickey Mousing as R2 gets them out with his drill. She seems to have endless sort of gadgets in this particular bit, and that sort of joke was then put in Revenge of the Sith and Attack of the Clones, where he sort of blasts people with fire and starts flying down and everything else. Yes, that is kind of it. In fact, it's a little bit quicker than what I thought it was going to be, actually. It was going to be a terribly long one, but it's not necessarily difficult music in the same senses as some of the things that we've seen before, but it was just a particularly long cue to do because there's a lot of material to get through, a lot of little repeated moments, but they're not quite the same, kind of fiddly to work out as well. So, but you know, the glory of it is that most of the action is octatonic based. It's a little bit more complicated than just writing an octatonic scale, of course. But this cue will really help with that because it has such sort of rhythmic vibrancy as well, and that's also something to bear in mind. Notice that as soon as you start having regularity, the action actually slows down, which is why there isn't, which I think composers of today tend not to really do. They tend to sort of slow things down through lots of repetition. Because if you keep going, you're now slowing everything down. Whereas if you go, that is much more irregular and it has a lot more rhythmic vibrancy and energy to it. So that is that cue, and it's good to be back after a bit of a break away. So I will see you at the next one. Bye for now.